never set out measures they'd take to deal with the cost of living crisis. We're joined by Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds.
Good morning.
Mr. Reynolds, thanks for joining us. I feel like I should congratulate you, first of all, on your new Labour leader, Mr. Gordon Brown.
Well, good morning. It's nice to be with you today. What Gordon Brown did yesterday, I think, is set out quite rightly the scale of the crisis we're facing. I mean, there seems to be, frankly, a crisis across almost every aspect of the nation today. But there's no doubt the energy emergency is the most significant part of that. It was, for me, a welcome reminder that we have had in the past prime ministers who can tackle these crises, who've got the serious, effective leadership a country needs when it faces these problems. And we haven't got that clearly at the moment. But I would just say, we set out our plans for a windfall tax to help people with their energy bills in January of this year. We set out a programme for a national insulation programme to reduce energy consumption in September last year. Now, we're going to be making more announcements over the next few days. I can tell you today that one of those will be we will end the immoral practice of people on prepayment meters being charged more for their energy. That would help 4 million households on top of the support they would get from our windfall tax as well as that. But there is no doubt that the energy emergency is something that demands action, and we recognise that and we'll respond to that.
I mean, your plan that you outlined was only going to save people £13 a week and then a bit of insulation. But just going back to the point about Gordon Brown, I mean, you question leadership, but there hasn't been much leadership from the Labour Party. The fact that a former leader of the Labour Party, the former Prime Minister, has had to come in and make quite a huge statement about and a bit of a plan, well, quite a major plan, whereas we've heard nothing from Keir Starmer, your leader today.
Well, I don't accept that. Now, just let me say, first of all, don't belittle, by the way, energy efficiency, that there's major gains this country can make and should have made over the last few years by reducing our energy consumption. If you compare our housing stock to other countries, it is phenomenal what could be done if there was a government willing to meet that. But just going back to the response to that, look, we set out in January that windfall tax. The government still, in this leadership contest, can't decide whether they're for or against that, but we set out the scale of intervention that was required. That would have been, for a third of the population, a third of households in this country, £600 of relief. Now, the crisis has only got worse since then, and we will respond in scale and in kind to do that. But if you look at how we were successful around the windfall tax, it wasn't just in the argument that was made. It was in having a clear costed programme of where that money would go, why support would go to those places, and what kind of relief they'd get as a result of that. And I think that's what you need as an opposition. People don't just want to know you see a problem. They want to see you've got a clear plan to tackle that. And that's what we've done, and that's what we're going to continue to do, and that is what is required.
People also want to see, the leader front and centre, and there's a lot of questions about where is Sir Keir Starmer in all of this? Why haven't we heard from him? There's a national crisis going on. You're accusing the government of being missing in action, but there are a lot of people that are saying, well, hold on, we're hearing from Gordon Brown, we're hearing from Martin Lewis, we're hearing from Sir Ed Davey. They're effectively the opposition at the moment because we haven't heard a strong line, a clear line from Sir Keir Starmer on this.
Well, again, I would have to disagree with that. I think go back to January when the windfall tax was first put forward by the Labour Party in opposition. That is what it allows us to make the running in terms of the response that is required to a crisis of this kind. And that's not only the argument that needs to be made, that's the right intervention.
Sorry to interrupt, but that was back in January. That we know now that the price cap is going to be significantly higher than the figure that was forecast back then. We're in an escalating crisis right now, so it's fair enough you saying, OK, well, this is what was put in place or suggested back in January. We're talking about the situation now and where Sir Keir Starmer is and why he hasn't come out and spoken on this.
Well, he will be doing that. I mean, the forecast for the cap has been projected to go up further this week, so we will be responding to that over the next few days. That's why I'm here today to tell you that part of the response to that will be to stop the practice of people who are on prepayment energy meters, about 4 million households across the UK, being charged more for their energy. That would be an additional boost to them between now and March next year, or an extra £200 of relief. So these are the components, the practical things that can be done to help people, and that's what we have been articulating.
Yeah,
that's what we'll continue
I suppose the point
to do.
is that what you accuse the Conservatives of not having a plan, and they will say, well, look, something's going to come out in the next few days, couple of weeks, and you're saying effectively the same thing. Can I just pick up on one major point that Gordon Brown has suggested, was renationalising some of these energy companies, at least temporarily. Would you agree with that?
Well, what Gordon Brown said was that the state must act as a provider of last resort to secure the supply of gas and electricity to households. Now, of course, that is absolutely correct. I would just say it's important to recognise...
So you do agree with that?
No,
you do think renationalising...
Let me just finish my point, if I may. It is important to recognise that where the record profits have accrued is in the North Sea oil and gas producers rather than the energy supply companies. So the windfall tax is a better mechanism to seek to gain some of that windfall for the benefit of businesses and households across the country overall. I would also just say, in the pandemic, this country accrued a great deal of debt, which was the right thing to do to respond to the crisis. That does limit the ability to act on other things.
Would a windfall tax solve an immediate problem, though? And people are suffering now. If you pose a windfall tax even now, how would that translate to the benefit of customers who can't afford to pay their bills right now, who are already compiling huge debts?
Yes, it would, because we would use that revenue, first of all, to take VAT off energy bills, second of all, to remove some of the levies that currently appear on bills. There's something called supplier of last resort levy when an energy company goes bust. And we would massively expand both the value to £400 and the scope of something called warm homes discount. So a third of households in this country would be getting, just from those interventions, £600, further from removing the additional penalty for prepayment users. And then we intend to go further beyond that too.
Would you agree with some of your colleagues? I think the likes of Diane Abbott, Jeremy Corbyn, Mike McDonnell has suggested... Sorry, Tom McDonnell, has suggested John McDonnell has suggested that you should recall Parliament. Do you agree with that?
Well, I'm open to that. I think what colleagues are doing there is saying to their own constituents they recognise the scale of the crisis we're facing, and they're right to do so. I would just say, if you look at why would you recall Parliament? Well, you usually do that to give the government powers to act in a crisis. Now, the government don't need any more powers. They could take action today. There's nothing stopping them responding to this crisis. So I'm open to it, but let's not get away from the fact the government has everything it needs to respond to this emergency. It's choosing not to do so.
Are you worried that your message isn't getting through, though? Because when we look at the latest polls, you're not seen as a government in waiting, are you? 52% of people may think that the Conservatives don't deserve to continue in power, but only 37% think that Labour are ready to take over. So there's a problem there, isn't there?
Well, as an opposition, you've always got to be proving your credentials, proving your case. We do lead in the polls. We lead on who would be most trusted to run the economy or to tackle immigration or public services. So I think that is a significant advance on where Labour has been in the past. But look, how do you make your case? How do you prove your credentials? You don't just make interventions pointing out where there's a crisis. You have your own plan to deal with that. And that's exactly what we had with the windfall tax intervention and the package of measures I've just outlined that would help going further today, saying we take away this penalty for prepayment users. This is how you do that. In opposition, you've got to keep making your case. People only listen to a little bit of what politicians say. You've got to keep at it, keep pushing it. That's exactly what we'll be doing.
Just very, very quickly, do you think that MPs should be allowed to claim expenses for utility bills, even if it is their second homes, at a time like this? And there seems to be no upper limit either. They can claim even the high prices they're being charged. Do you think that's right at the moment?
Well, there is an upper limit. There's an overall cap on accommodation costs. I think it's right in a country where...
I think you're fine. I've checked this out. There's no upper limit on utility. There might be an upper limit on rental, but there's no upper limit on utility costs.
There is an overall budget, though, just for the overall amount of things. So
you're defending it. You think it's OK, is it, at a time like this, that we pay MPs bills, but they won't offer to pay out?
No, I don't think people should get their own bills paid, but I think in a system where your parliament is in your capital city, northern MPs, people who are not from the southeast, should be able to stay near to parliament overnight in the week when parliament is sitting. And
despite the fact they're on £80,000 a year with a £2,000 pay rise this year, they should be allowed to claim their utility bills.
I think if you're going to have a system where MPs have to stay in the capital city, people who are not from that capital city should have those costs paid for if they're doing so. It shouldn't be their own energy bills, however. Everyone has their own home and they've got to pay their own bills quite rightly for that, like anybody else.
All right. Jonathan Reynolds, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.